Hey everybody, welcome to part 4 of the segmented bowl tutorial. In part 1 we talked a little bit about math and design, cutting segments and then gluing them into rings. In part 2 we talked about ring flattening, and then in part 3 we glued up all our rings into this bowl blank. If you missed any of those videos, you can check them out in the link in the description or in the segmented bowl tutorial. So now in the final part of our video, we're going to take this bowl blank and talk about turning, sanding, and a little bit on different finishes. So let's get this chucked up on the lathe. So in my opinion, this is the easiest part of the process, and I think that turning a segment bowl is also a lot easier than turning a traditional bowl like from a blank. The orientation of our boards when we cut our segment means that the entire circumference of our bowl is going to be side grain. So in a traditional bowl you would be running into end grain, which would possibly lead to tear out. We're not going to have any of that. When we turn this, you're going to see some nice, fine, and clean shavings coming off of this. I also think if you're a person that kind of struggles with the shaping of a bowl, you're not going to run into that nearly as much as here, because right now the basic shape of our bowl is already set. Obviously we can't go anything outside of what we've already built. In our case, we did have some pretty thick rings, and that was just because all of this wood was just leftovers from other projects, which is why it's so thick. Normally I would go a lot thinner to try and save wood, but like I said, this is all just leftovers and scraps, so it doesn't really matter. But that does give us a little more leeway for the final shape of our bowl. We do have a little bit of room to work within this blank. Now when I turn my segment pieces, what I like to do is start from the outside, because that kind of gives me a better visualization of the final shape. But I always tend to knock down these corners first and just start to tie all my rings together, and then come from the inside and kind of just get a feel of how thick I have left before I start to make any real decisions as far as the shape. So you can see, here's those nice, fine side grain shavings we're talking about. We're getting really nice, clean cuts. We don't have any tear out. So I'm just gonna go ahead and knock down the rest of these, and then we'll start to shape our bowl. So at this point our bowl is basically smoothed out, a few little spots, but we do have a decent amount to shape with still. So what I think I'd like to do is come in a little more on this top and make it less flared out. The only part I'm a little concerned with is right here where we start to really step up our segments. We still have a decent amount on the inside, more than enough to make it work. But what I think I'd like to do with that is just kind of bring this into the base and do almost like a pedestal with it. And I think that'll look nice with a less flared top part. So we'll go ahead and just get these last few little grooves out, and then that should be the final shape for the outside of our bowl. Alright, so as far as turning our inside goes, it's basically the same as the outside. We're just going to start by knocking down all these edges, get everything smoothed out, and then we will see what our thickness is and kind of go from there. If you used different size strips of wood to make your segments, just be careful on little sections like this that you don't come in too aggressive thinking that you're here and actually knock this off. So yeah, just be careful of little things like that when you're starting out. So everything is about where we want it on this. We do have some ridges in here. We're getting a lot of vibration because this is kind of a big piece. So I've gone ahead and we're gonna slow down the lathe and put a fresh grind on the bowl gouge and then go and just do a cleanup pass to try and get any of those little cutting ridges out. So we are all done turning, so now it is on to everyone's favorite part of wood turning. We are gonna start sanding. So to start off, I've got a drill with a fairly aggressive sanding wheel on it. We're basically just gonna use this to get rid of any of these little turning marks, get everything nice and smoothed out, and then we will switch our grits, and basically we're just trying to take the scratch marks from the last grit with every grit we go up. So we've got the inside and the outside sanded with that disc sander. We've gotten rid of all those little ridges and rounded off the corners. So now what I'm gonna do is switch over to just a regular piece of sandpaper. As we cut with a sander, our lines are gonna be this way. So now we're gonna go perpendicular to them, and it's gonna make it a lot easier to cut. Also, my lathe can go in reverse. If yours can too, it's really helpful because you are cutting the grain instead of trying to cut the grain that's already pushed down. It's going to kind of raise it up and cut it better, so we'll go ahead and put that in reverse. Run this, and then we're just going to alternate between a piece of sandpaper and a disc as we go through the grits to about 400. So our bowl is sanded down to 400 grit. We're nice and smooth. So now we need to talk about finishing. There are lots and lots of different ways you can finish a bowl, all kinds of different products out there. I'm going to kind of break this down into two different categories. So say we wanted a natural finish or something food safe, I would recommend a mineral oil, a tung oil, something along those lines. I personally like my segmented pieces to be more like show pieces than usable things. So the two different ways I finish bowls like that are either with a spray finish. The advantage of this is it goes on nice and smooth. Unfortunately, I have yet to find one that I really think is all that durable. I've tried lacquer, acrylic enamel. So we're going to go ahead and do a wipe-on finish, but before we do any of that, we're going to go ahead and put a coat of sanding sealer on the inside and outside of this. I'm going to be using Mylan's sanding sealer today, and we'll go ahead and just wipe this on, and then that's going to cure for 24 hours before we do anything else. Our sanding sealer has dried, so now what I'm going to do is just take some Scotch-Brite and we're just going to nice and gently hit everything. This is going to take down any high spots in the sanding sealer, as well as any little pieces of the wood's grain that kind of stuck up as we put the sanding sealer on, and that way we have a nice smooth base to build our final finish off of. So for our final finishing, we're going to be using a product called Waterlux Gloss. This is something I learned from Jim Sprague over at Sprague Woodturning on his YouTube channel. This is what he uses. I really like this product a lot. It creates a very nice hard coating and gives a very nice glossy finish. So we're just going to go ahead and wipe this on the entire bowl. And then this will take 24 hours to cure before we can put the next coat of it on. Our first two coats of the Waterlux have fully cured, so now what we're going to do is just take some 600 grit sandpaper and we're going to really gently wet sand this and just knock down any little high spots or anything that got into our finish when it was drying, and then we'll go ahead and put our third and final coat on. Been a few days since our final coat of finish, so let's go ahead and get this bottom parted off and we'll get the bottom finished. So we're just going to be using a parting blade. We'll come in and go almost all the way, shut the lathe off, and then just use a saw. So our bowl is a little bit too big to turn on the lathe, so we're just going to do this off the end of the lathe. We're just going to take some really light cuts here, clean this up, and put a nice little concave or convex or whatever on it so it has a nice foot to sit on. And then we will just repeat the finishing process for the rest of the bowl. We'll sand this, put some sanding sealer on, and then put some finish on. And then we will have a finished bowl. So here is our finished bowl. I think it looks great. You can see our segments there's really no gaps in it. So again, the people that say that you need a wedgie sled or a different setup and can't use a chop saw to do this, completely false. We do have like one little segment right here where we do have a little gap, but that was probably not so much with the technique. In part 2, when we talked about the different methods of planing, I just wanted to point this out. So you can see these rings right here that are stacked up. These are all ones that we did with a planer, and you can see they're nice and tight. Now, when we talked about having non-parallel surfaces from our sanding disc, you can see right here we do have a little bit of a gap. And again, I think that's kind of from putting uneven pressure against the sanding disc. But yeah, I think this project turned out really good. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please like it and leave a comment. And if you want to see more of my content, then please consider subscribing. Thank you guys so much for watching this tutorial.